We're going to have a chat on stage for 10 or 15 minutes, and then there'll be an interval of also about 10 minutes when I'll come back with Gordon Brown and ask him what on earth he was talking about. But I'd just like to put to you guys two ideas. Very interesting how you approach this. You were talking about uncertainty, Gerry, and how that's difficult for businesses to cope with. And you were talking primarily about education and about the generation of ideas. And these things aren't necessarily in conflict, but new ideas do change the scene all the time. I wonder if it's the case, thinking about globalization, governments and so on, companies surely, large companies in particular, are much more powerful than governments now, aren't they? I mean, isn't it not the case that the 7 or 8 largest companies in the world really are running the show? Is that fair?
I mean,
outrageous generalization?
A company that thinks it's more powerful than the government of the country in which it operates is going to be for some surprises one day. I think it is. I'm a Democrat to my fingertips. And why do we have governments? It's because democracies create them. I mean, frankly, for any company to challenge a government or to think it's more powerful than a government, in Scotland, for example, I enjoy very much working with the Scottish government. I don't agree with them on everything, but I enjoy working with them. I respect very much that we have Scottish MPs in the Houses of Parliament. I pay the Scottish government and Scottish members of Parliament and Scottish ministers huge respect, because we're all working in a society together. We're all working in a civil society. And if any one of us think that we're somehow more powerful than the others, I think that's the road to ruin.
Okay. Heather, how do you react to that thought?
Yes, well, I mean, as well as my job in education, I also sit on the board of 2 public companies on either side of the Atlantic, and I can tell you that, as Gerry says, we in one of those companies we have 100 people in the compliance department. I mean, I really think that companies who think they are above government and regulation are in for a nasty shock and have been in for a nasty shock. Just ask Google or Uber or Amazon. These are people who have come up hard against governments, and we do live in a democracy, and people do need. And what gives us certainty, actually, and what business likes is certainty, and so what gives us certainty is to know this is how we are regulated, this is what the rules are, and this is how we need to operate. And that's why businesses need to work in well-regulated and well-governed environments. That's what's made Scotland and the UK such a fantastic place for businesses to set up.
Well, let me reframe that.
Let's look the other way. If you look at the United States right now, okay, so overnight, one day someone says, right, the following people can't come back into the country. If you're Harvard University, you've got faculty somewhere away who happen to have an Iranian passport and are attending a conference in Brussels. They can't come home tomorrow. That's not certainty. Okay, we want certainty.
Against that background, isn't fake news a terrible thing? Isn't it terrible that people are reading things which the people who have put it there know that is fake? That is what's going to sow mistrust.
I think that's true. Let me come back to that with an anecdote, and then I'll reframe my first question, because I don't agree with either of you. But when Douglas Alexander was fighting the referendum campaign in 2014, he told me that he decided to have his surgeries in a supermarket rather than in a church hall or wherever, because he would get more people coming to see him. And a lady came to see him in Asda or Morrison's or wherever it was, and said, you are campaigning for a no vote, and I'm never going to forgive you. I'm never going to vote for you again. I think it's shocking what you're doing. And Dougie thought, well, I've lost her, so I'll ask her some questions. And she said, the whole thing's a conspiracy, quite clearly. There are dark forces at work, and so on. And he said, where do you read your news? Facebook, she said. Now, that's a perfect illustration. And he then said, what's your job? Oh, I'm a senior social worker. Now, I found that story shocking.
But that's not about, are they bigger than government? It's about influence. So I think if you're asking a separate question, which is what has influence these days, do companies or organizations have more influence than governments? That is very different. And the truth is that people these days have more influence. It's not companies or whatever. people like Facebook and so on, those are just facilitating lots and lots of people. So that's how Donald Trump gets elected. That's how Geert Wilders nearly gets elected in Holland, is because people are empowered to change things and like that idea and will exercise it. It's not about companies being bigger than governments, it's about those companies facilitating people.
Well, that was what I was going to ask, and the reason I raised that, exactly that. But on the other hand, Facebook is a company, Zuckerberg runs it and so on. They've had to change their policy as a consequence of fake news. They said they're going to clean up their sites and not allow that kind of thing to happen. But isn't it a runaway train? I mean, can anyone control this sort of thing?
I think there's a responsibility on educators, isn't there? I mean, it's a sad if we can't educate our children, our people. There's always been propaganda in the world, you know. The Be No Comic and the Dandy had propaganda. And there's a lot of propaganda out there, Alice, as you know yourself. The fact it appears on a website or in Facebook doesn't mean it's true. Isn't there a responsibility on all of us to think of it in that way? You know, not to think these things are great gods whom you have to worship. It's to teach ourselves, to teach our families, to teach our children, to teach our friends, you know, which Adam Smith surely would have wanted to hear us say. You know, the basis of rationality. And when I quite agree with you, if all you read is some contorted view of the world, it's not surprising that you think about conspiracy theories, companies being greater than governments. But I think at their heart, it's not that companies in any way want to be greater than governments, but a lack of education sometimes appears to put companies in that position. I would be horrified to be on the board of a company, as I said, who thought it was in any way greater than the state in which it was operating.
I think one of the most important things we can educate people to do at all the stages, all ages of life, all over the world, which will also be a combatant for fake news, is intellectual curiosity. So I seek to develop in my children, in my students, and in my workforce, in the business that I ran for the last 16 years, my intellectual curiosity. The intellectually curious person will look at something presented on social media and think, I wonder if that is true. I get, again, when I was preparing for this event, I thought I would look up Hassan al-Khair's Wikipedia entry. And to my horror, I discovered that he was down as a University of Edinburgh graduate. Because somebody had just put that on there, because they had read that he had an MBA from Edinburgh Business School, and they assumed that that was... So I had to go into Wikipedia and fix this and make him a Heriot Watt graduate. But you know, would people have, when they saw that he was named, something was in error, would they have thought, I wonder if that's true or not? I actually went back and found his student records to make sure I knew what I was talking about. But it is, if you develop intellectual curiosity in people, you will develop the thing to challenge it. You know, is that really true? Is the £350 million a week that's going to go to the health service if we come out of the union really a true figure? You know, whatever. You know, you actually you do challenge these things if you're intellectually curious. So that if we can develop intellectual curiosity in people, it will combat fake news.
I think that must be right. Let me worry at this a bit more. On 15th of February, the Roundtree Foundation produced a report on what they call the minimum income standard, the MIS. And they found that was basically the cost of living in the house that you lived in and looking after the family that you had. It was obviously a variable figure. But they looked at how many people fell below that compared with 2008-9, roughly a 5-year interval. And it was 15 million in Britain fell below the MIS in 2008-9. In 2014-15, the figure had grown to 19 million, 6 million of whom were children. And that's about 45% of all the children in Britain. Is that not an explanation for the sort of seismic change, indeed the kind of political chaos that we've seen? And is it not the case that electorates, Democrats, are actually saying, we have no interest in the status quo because we are the left behind. We are the people with nothing. So we'll vote for change of any kind. And is that not a case of globalization, introducing that level of uncertainty? And so that democracies are almost consuming themselves in a way. As I said
earlier, I feel that the establishment, we've let people down. we've allowed this to develop. So how do you solve that? You have to chip away at it where you can. We discovered in Standard Life 4 or 5 years ago, by chance, there was nobody in the company under the age of 24. Never been our policy to say we wouldn't recruit youngsters, but for some reason, the personnel policies or something, deep down in the bowels of the company, had produced a company where, frankly, it was easier for recruiters to go to universities or to go to this and to recruit people. So we said we would do something about that. And we've started this thing in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Guarantee Scheme, where every school child leaving school in Edinburgh gets the chance now of a job or to go to some further studies or what have you. We now have in Standard Life 5% of the company is under the age of 23, just in the space of that time. We pay these young adults the living wage. We treat them with respect. We give them proper jobs. And we deliberately recruit, because these are people, frankly, who may not have found their way in life otherwise. We open up their eyes to opportunities. And I think it's through that individual companies actually living up to individual sense of responsibilities and doing something about it. It's the key thing. You go into our canteen now, and you'll find young people there. Our teams love it, because our company is, again, another interesting statistic. People talk about the scourge of call centres. The average length of service of my people in my call centres in Standard Life is 17 years. I say that to other chairmen, and they say, you can't possibly mean 17 years. You must mean 17 weeks or 17 months. And these people have loved the fact that we've had this kind of infusion of youngsters and school leavers into the business. Now, I don't give that example to particularly praise Standard Life, but it's just to show that one company can actually change things. And that's the kind of, I think, sharing knowledge and ideas that we have to do and have practical outcomes. I've got to the point in my life where I'm not really interested in anything unless it has a practical outcome. Like the great work you do with the book festivals.
Thank you.
Like the work this weekend. This has a practical outcome. And I think, again, that's something which is worth of us all thinking in this room who have some ability to influence matters. How do you create practical outcomes which help start solving some of the problems that you're referring to, Alistair?
So, and I totally agree with Gerry on that front. And I would cite three things particularly in Scotland. So I spent from 2000 to 2005 serving as a trustee for something called Tomorrow's People that worked with the long-term unemployed, and wandering around Govan as me doing voluntary counselling, careers counselling, and finding people in fourth generation unemployed families and helping them to get back into work. That is intervention, and it's stuff that you need to do. That Tomorrow's People actually was created out of Diageo. So it wasn't somebody sat up in bed one day, read The Guardian and thought, I'll go and start a charity about this. It was when Diageo were downsizing and realising there was a real issue and need for this. And then the second half of, I spent chairing and leading Britain's biggest education to employment charity, where again, we've done a lot of our work in Scotland, Career Ready, where we actually intervene, as Gerry says, at school. And that's the time to go in and intervene. I mean, there are still going to be generations of people who've missed this. And this intervention I'm also bringing to Edinburgh Business School, and we're starting this in January. We're going to bring groups of young people not to be trained on it as an MBA, obviously, but to be brought together and given work-relevant skills, actually, in the business school. So it's up to businesses, it's up to individuals. Everybody can help with this, and it's up to a government.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gerry Grimstone, Heather McGregor. Thank you, dear.